we begin the day with the crude and crass in these final days of campaigning for the White House. We reported on the garbage gaffe at the start of the program, but there is much more. On Sunday at a Trump rally in New York City, one of the speakers said Vice President Kamala Harris has pimp handlers. Now, some voters say it fits a pattern of misogynistic comments that Donald Trump is known for. The latest installment came yesterday. At a Trump rally, the former president described a conversation that he claims he had with his staff about women. Take a listen.
And my people told me about 4 weeks ago, I was saying, no, I want to protect the people. I want to protect the women of our country. I want to protect the women. Sir, please don't say that. Why? They said, we think it's very inappropriate for you to say. I said, why? I'm president. I want to protect the women of our country. They said. They said, sir, I just think it's inappropriate for you to say, pay these guys a lot of money. Can you believe it? I said, well, I'm going to do it whether the women like it or not. I'm going to protect them. I'm going to protect them from migrants coming in. I'm going to protect them from foreign countries that want to hit us with missiles and lots of other things.
All right, I'm joined now by Julian Müller-Kaler with the German Council on Foreign Relations. He focuses on the U.S. and transatlantic relations. He's the man to talk to right now. Julian, it's good to have you on the program. Donald Trump, he has never polled well with women voters. I mean, his campaign advisors, they are apparently aware of that. Trump doesn't seem to care too much about it. Can he continue to alienate female voters and still win this election next Tuesday?
Oh, good to be with you again. You know, I think the important numbers are obviously the gender gap tilt, you know, the difference between the female lead and the male lead. So the important question really is whether that gap or that alienation of female voters is as destructive to his campaign and success than the attraction that he has with male voters. It's actually interesting, the numbers that we see currently indicate that it's pretty close to the numbers that we saw 2016. So he has about a 10-point lead with males and a 10-point disadvantage with women. So they sort of equalize each other out. But it's certainly a question that we'll see the result on Tuesday.
You know, talking about voters, according to the University of Florida's election lab, more than 60 million people have already voted in early voting. I mean, that smashes the early voter turnout record that we saw set back in 2020. What do you read into this?
So I think historically, Democrats used to be the ones that went to the polls early. The numbers that we're seeing at the moment indicate that that's not the case this time around. Early voting numbers are up on both sides of the political spectrum. And the traditional rule that high voter turnout usually favors the Democrats. I think with Trump on the ballot is not necessarily the case. You see that he brought a lot of folks into the political debate again that have previously not voted. So it's going to be, it's very hard to make predictions on how voter turnout, including early voting, is affecting the results in this presidential election.
I want to ask you, too, about absentee ballots. You know, I spoke with my local election commission in North Carolina this week. I was told that they've had to increase security at polling places and at election offices. They've told me that verbal and physical threats have been made. I mean, do you expect violence after Election Day, regardless of the result?
So I think we don't see another January 6th like we saw in the aftermath of the last presidential election for a variety of reasons. I think that, first of all, the Biden administration is in power. So you see the National Guard being under the control of the Biden administration, and cautions have been taking place in Washington, D.C. itself. However, it's not unlikely that you see something similar on the regional level. It depends a lot on how close the election is going to be and how long we will have to wait until we see a final result. And I could see that particularly in some places where they only start counting votes from mail-in ballots after the polls have closed that you see a lot of confusion around how those numbers might change. And if they are particularly close, I mean, we see that in the 2000 election, it took a couple of weeks in Florida to potentially recount and then a Supreme Court decisions. So if we are in a scenario like this, I think the potential for violence and civil unrest is higher, irrespective of who wins the election.
Do you think that we could see something like a repeat of 2000 where, this could be taken all the way to the Supreme Court to decide?
Well, those states that really matter this time around are obviously the Rust Belt states, previously known as the Blue Wall. So it's Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. So I think those are on the East Coast. So, you see early trends on that. If Pennsylvania or Michigan are so close that they are in that margin where you can request a recount, irrespective of who actually wins, I could see a scenario in which the final election result is being dragged out. It all really matters on how decisive a Trump or Harris win is going to be at the end of the day. And that will then matter what the consequences and implications of a potential recount or confusions around the numbers will look like.
This is the third U.S. presidential election with Donald Trump as a candidate. Regardless of the outcome on Tuesday, what have the past 8 years done to transatlantic ties?
Well, I would argue that Trump is more of a symptom than he is a cause of significant change within the American electorate. I think already Obama had the argument to say, well, what are all our foreign engagements worth if, we could have spent all that money on bridges and roads here in the United States? So I think after the war on terror, this expansion of military engagement around the world, you sort of see a new economic and foreign policy nationalism that Trump obviously is a very powerful symptom, but also that the Biden administration has, exemplified. So to the frustration of the Europeans. I think Trump, yes, is loud in its criticism of European partners, in its criticism of NATO and obligations, but actually, particularly on the economic front and the foreign policy front, you see quite a bit of alignment between the Harris campaign and Trump, much to the detriment of European allies.
Julian Müller-Kaler from the German Council on Foreign Relations. Julian, we appreciate your time and your analysis tonight. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.